Untitled on the beat.
What's good, everyone? It's your boy Nati with another video for the channel. Welcome back to DMV Sports Zone. And as always, every single week, we have our collab video with Noah from Sport AI. And Noah, do you want to introduce your platform once again onto the channel? Because I know we usually save that for the end.
For sure. Hey guys, this is Noah. As Nati mentioned, I'm here from Sport AI. Sport AI is a mobile app platform integrated with artificial intelligence that will help you optimize your fantasy sports lineups and helps anyone understand sports analytics. These past couple weeks, we've been coming on the show, hitting some big wins in terms of fantasy prediction, and through our newsletter, we've been sending out breakout picks every single week, been killing it and helping our teams accumulate over 143 wins and only 33 losses. So, I mean, this proof is in the pudding.
Yep.
Can't wait to get started today, and just make sure if you're interested in signing up for the beta, check out the link in the bio.
For sure. No, Sport AI is a great platform. We'll get into it a little bit more later, but all I have to say is they predicted T. Higgins over Tyler Lockett. That's how good that platform is. So, so let's get started as we do every single week. Noah, can you give me your one fantasy pick / Sport AI's fantasy pick that you got right last week?
I think we had a couple last week. Pulling out the notes now because we had quite a few dubs. I think our biggest one though is Tom Brady of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We had him as our number 3 breakout quarterback for this week, and in the top 5 overall quarterbacks for fantasy. And a lot of people were unsure, and man, did they regret sitting him on the bench. Brady proved that he still got it. A classic example of what makes an elite quarterback in a real-world scenario. One bad game doesn't define a season, and Brady knows that, bounced back, absolutely demolishing, unfortunately, my Panthers.
Yeah.
I mean, on top of that, a lot of other factors played in the part, injuries to Teddy Bridgewater, but the fact remains that Brady tore apart a decent defense, showing not only for Mike Evans owners that he is a wide receiver 1 for the rest of the season, but that he could pass it to anyone. Antonio Brown starting to surge a little bit, as well as Chris Godwin coming healthy. I see Brady being a top quarterback for the rest of the season, but that was a great dub for us.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a great dub. Tom Brady has been putting out those great performances, even at the age of, 42, 43 now, I believe. Mm-hmm. So I look for the Bucs to be a threat come the end of the season. For me, last week I actually did pretty good. I did nail actually 2 picks last week. Antonio Gibson as my Week 10 fantasy stud, and Jonnu Smith as my fantasy dud. Antonio Gibson didn't have the most spectacular real-life running back game. He didn't have a lot of yards, but he ended up with 20.2 half PPR points because of the fact that he had 2 touchdowns on the ground, which is always great to see out of my guy Antonio Gibson. He's been a solid running back to date, and I liked how Scott Turner, the Washington offense coordinator, as I mentioned on this channel, how he involves him more in the pass game now, which is great to see, especially coming out of the bye. I do worry that McKissick is going to be a thorn in Gibson's side in the pass game, but Gibson really hasn't proved otherwise in terms of him being a top 10 to 15 fantasy running back at this point. And now he gets to play Cincinnati, which isn't the worst rush defense, but is kind of mediocre. So I look for Gibson to have another great week next week. And then Jonnu Smith, dub performance, exactly the one that I projected, exactly the one that Noah, I believe, also agreed to on the channel. Only 2 catches, 14 yards, and the entire Tennessee pass game struggled early. So doesn't get easier for Smith now. I believe he plays the Ravens next and then the Colts again. So yeah, it's not looking good at all. But yeah, those are the 2 picks that I got right from last week. But moving on, what is one pick that you got wrong from last week, if at all?
Yeah, so I think that fortunately for us here at Sport AI, with the power of AI, we of course have the big surges, but we didn't have too many big losses. However, the one player that did end up disappointing a little was Jared Goff.
Yeah.
Of the Los Angeles Rams. Seattle's defense. Seattle's offense was, projected to have a good game, and as a result, might have been a shootout. However, we were reminded very rudely that Jalen Ramsey is the best man-on-man corner in the league, absolutely shutting down DK Metcalf.
Even ahead of
Tyler Lockett.
Tre'Davious White.
Okay, well, another day for another discussion. But
Yeah.
Tyler Lockett also struggled. As we mentioned, we knew that was going to happen. So, Goff, unfortunately, unlike Brady, I don't see him having a bounce back week. He's in the lower 25th percentile of starters for the rest of the season on our end. So Jared Goff, this was his one chance to, help a team out. But going forward, I don't see him being useful for the rest of the season.
Yeah. And to be fair, even though you, Sport AI, and you predicted Goff as the fantasy MVP last week, I didn't do too much better. I predicted him as a stud. So I mean, yeah, we're both, I guess, both got that wrong last week, and it happens, right? So it's all good. But the pick that I got wrong last week completely was the Adam Thielen dud pick. Shouts out to him first for the great Alex Trebek tribute cleats. As we heard last weekend, yeah, Alex Trebek passed away. And he's a Washington football fan too, so a lot of people don't know that. But yeah, big loss there. But Thielen definitely repped him well on Monday Night Football, and always great to see that. On-field wise, Thielen also performed above expectations against the stout Bears defense, and didn't have too many yards or catches, but still ended up finding the end zone twice during the game and totaled 18 half PPR points as well. So sucks to miss on this pick, but it happens. And I also think Thielen's going to be a great play next week because he's playing against the Cowboys, who now don't have Trevon Diggs because I believe he's out for 4 to 6 weeks. So yeah, look for Thielen to have a pretty sizable day next week as well. But
yeah, no, definitely Thielen's a good pick. I think unlike Goff, he's going to be a solid contributor for the future. Quentin Jefferson, though, keep in mind, he didn't have the touchdown that he wanted.
Justin Jefferson.
Justin Jefferson, but he absolutely went off, which will be good for Jefferson and Thielen. Thielen's starting to accept the role that Diggs had last year, mainly as a slot, end zone target, while Jefferson's a deep threat against a Cowboys defense who lost their number one corner and is already one of the worst defenses in the league. I mean, it's too early to say, but he's trending up.
For sure. And moving on, as we do every week, can you give me one fantasy sleeper that all fantasy owners out there should look out for in week 11?
Yeah. So we have a couple. It's gonna be tough, but I will say that we want to make sure. I think now that we are in crunch mode for a lot of teams for the playoffs, we want to focus on those that may be on your waiver wire.
Mm-hmm.
And that player, I think a lot of people have been hearing about him, is Jameis Winston of the New Orleans Saints.
Okay, going out there. Okay.
So right now, there's rumors that Taysom Hill might be the starter or Jameis Winston, but Winston came in relief. Sean Payton said again that Winston has been practicing with the ones.
No.
So he's the projected starter. Against the Falcons defense is absolutely atrocious. With Michael Thomas healthy, a very strong run game, and a balanced passing attack, Winston has a chance to explode. Expectations, of course, for the entire season may be capped because we don't know the extent of Drew Brees' absence. But we do know at a minimum he will be gone for the next 2 games. But Jameis Winston steps in an elite offensive situation against a bad defense in the Falcons.
Mm-hmm.
Winston is our breakout pick for this week.
That's an absolute great pick there. You said you had a couple more?
Yeah, just quickly, the other one that we wanted to mention is Deontay Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah.
So Deontay Johnson, I know people are concerned about injury, but he went off last week. Interestingly enough, seemingly didn't get any targets towards the end of that game, despite exploding in the first half. Not a big concern. He is facing an atrocious defense this week as well. So be very excited for anyone who owns Deontay Johnson in that league. He is easily going to be a wide receiver 2 with potential to be a wide receiver 1 this week. That's going to be our breakout sleeper pick.
Okay, I love that pick. For me, my fantasy sleeper is someone who actually picked off waivers last week in my other league, not our league, but my other league. And that is Jacoby Myers, the wide receiver for the Patriots. Myers last week, he had a pretty good fantasy day against the Ravens. It was a tough matchup. They have some tough cornerbacks up there in Baltimore, and he still ended up thriving, even in the monsoon conditions that was going on. I don't know if you watched the game, Noah. Oh my gosh, I've never seen rain that heavy in a football game. It was insane, but I don't know how, but Cam Newton still kept feeding him, and Myers ended up having a good game. He got all the targets in the Patriots pass offense, really, and has become a go-to target of sorts over the last 3 weeks for Cam Newton. The stats say that, but most importantly, the eyeball test says that. And I've watched the Patriots last couple of weeks, man, and they just keep feeding Myers. So this week he plays against the Texans defense that, while average, right, it's not the worst in the world. It's not the Cowboys defense at this point. Myers is not projected to get that many fantasy points on a lot of sites, but I think that defense can definitely struggle against Myers. And I think Myers coming into this matchup is still a fantasy sleeper that could really produce for you, especially if he's still on the waiver wire at this point.
Definitely have to agree. Actually, we have Jacoby Myers as our number 2 breakout behind Deontay Johnson. So
there you go.
Great minds think alike, and we agree. Our analytics has him projected to have 2.1 more points than his projection, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in the case if you put him on the flex, especially if your season's on the line, better to have a consistent player than a boomer bust.
For sure.
So Jacoby Myers is a great pick.
For sure. Moving on, 2 great fantasy plays this week.
So we were talking about our sleepers, so everyone knows that those are the sleepers. However, 2 great fantasy plays this week that are a little bit more well-known would be DeAndre Swift of the Detroit Lions.
Great minds think alike. I literally have him in mind, too. Exactly.
Exactly, yes, sir. As well as Austin Hooper of the Cleveland Browns.
Oh, so I started him last week, and it burnt me very much. But yeah, go ahead.
So in the situation, as you mentioned, with DeAndre Swift, as we talked about and predicted from a couple weeks ago, continues to gobble up the carries more and more and more. As predicted, as the Lions are now desperate to make the playoffs, and now that they've gotten a sliver of hope with the win over the Washington football team, they are definitely not slowing down. DeAndre Swift's carries has went from as low as 45% to now 78% of carries last week. He is going to continue to be fed, and on a great matchup this weekend, I see that DeAndre Swift is going to have a great game. More particularly, the Lions are starting to run a lot more near the end zone, which means touchdowns. So even if he doesn't get the yards you need, the touchdowns will help his performance. So that's our great pick for this week. The other one is Austin Hooper of the Cleveland Browns. I know that Austin Hooper has had some duds, including last week. But this week, he's got a lot of our analytics project him as a top 10 at his position. Considering that the tight end position is very dry this season, Austin Hooper has an ideal matchup, and they're starting to find their identity. We know that they're going to go against a strong run defense, and they're going to heavily rely on Hunt and Chubb. However, they know that they have to have a safety outlet, and Hooper is becoming that safety outlet, as both Hunt and Chubb are not necessarily the pass-catching backs that they would want, even though they can. Austin Hooper has a great chance to be targeted in their end zone. He was targeted quite a few times in the end zone last week, despite not coming up with anything. But the targets are there. Hooper has the talent. Austin Hooper has a great future ahead of him.
No, if Austin Hooper, I mean, this week I probably am starting Mark Andrews in our league over Austin Hooper. But if Hooper goes off this week after giving me 1 point last week, I am going to go off. Yeah, that was a close matchup too, so I'm a little pissed there, but no, trust the machine as always. Yeah, for me,
trust the machine.
The first pick that I have, DeAndre Swift. You already went over pretty much everything you need to know about Swift. I'll just say this from experience, watching every second of that awful football game. Awful in the sense that Washington just, at the end of the game, 16 seconds left. I mentioned this in my media reaction video. Just wet the bed, as they always do. As a Washington football fan, all I got to say, DeAndre Swift, special talent. Should be a good running back in Detroit for quite a while, in my opinion, if he stays healthy. Had a lot of points last week, and like you said, he's playing against the Panthers. So the Panthers, you didn't mention this, but they gave up a gazillion yards and a touchdown to Ronald Jones last week. So, yeah, I think exactly. Yeah, I think Swift should be in for a very good performance this week as well. My other pick is someone who I also had as a great fantasy stud last week, and I'm going to continue doing it because of the fact that, one, he's my guy, and two, he's just thriving, man. And that guy is Antonio Gibson, the running back for this awful, trash football team. My guy, Antonio Gibson, started him in our league, and he produced, as I mentioned earlier in this video and last week as well. Ever since the Dallas game a couple weeks back, his matchups have been absolutely awesome. If you want for a fantasy running back, it's actually insane. He had Dallas one week. He had the Giants one week, which is, pretty underrated defense. But then he had, the Bengals. He's going to have the Bengals this week, and the Lions last week. I mean, all the good matchups that you want on a fantasy running back, he's getting you, much like DeAndre Swift is about to now. And I just think he's going to thrive, man, against the middling Bengals rush defense that, again, is not atrocious, but it's still pretty average, can definitely be got on. And despite McKissick also carving out a role in Washington, as I mentioned earlier, I still think Gibson is in for an encore great fantasy performance this week.
Mm-hmm. I think the last week against the Lions was a very important game for Gibson from a fantasy perspective because we didn't know if McKissick would take over or they would coexist. Fortunately for him, Gibson and McKissick clearly can coexist together and both thrive. Partially because Gibson and McKissick were former wide receivers, so we saw them go out into wide receiver lineup a lot. So they can coexist and actually be on the field together, so that's a great pick.
Yeah, I'll say this. Gibson, his vision is not all the way there yet. I think he'll continue to improve as he gets more reps as a running back. But, dude, every time they're in the red zone, he always gets the ball. And I think he's just going to keep scoring touchdowns. I believe he has 7 already at this point after not playing much of a role the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season. So I think, he's going to hopefully keep scoring and hopefully give you fantasy points week in and week out. But moving on, can give me, on the flip side, 2 disappointing fantasy duds this week.
Ooh, we have quite a few, actually, because there's not a lot of ideal matchups for your superstars. 2 of them, you're going to be a little bit surprised, but we'll start off with the first. We've always mentioned him as a sleeper breakout star and our most favorite pick for Sporty Eye early in the season. Unfortunately, this week, we're going to have to go with James Robinson of the Jacksonville Jaguars.
That sucks.
He is going to have to go against one of the best, even not the best, rushing defense in the Pittsburgh Steelers this weekend. And unlike last week where they're trending up, the receivers have not connected, as well as Tyler Eifert. Tyler Eifert has been middling the entire season. He is always a sleeper pick, of course, because of that potential, but always just ends up having an average game. The Pittsburgh Steelers know that Robinson is going to get fed. They're going to hone in on him. And without a proper outlet, I don't see a great production from James Robinson. Also, another troubling sign is that he is struggling to get into the end zone as of recent. Something that has not been a problem for him before, now suddenly a problem. I don't know if it's because of the offensive coordinator, because they did change up their offensive play style to fit around Robinson more, or Luton trying to throw more, but Robinson isn't getting the red zone touches or carries that he needs to salvage a bad game. So high chance, disappointing play this week. The other one, quickly, is Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Okay. Mike Evans has a very similar situation where the LA Rams just proved to everyone in the league, we can shut down your best receiver. And in a team very similar to the Seahawks that has that great receiving core, we expect Jalen Ramsey, he's already been practicing on some of the bigger receivers on the Rams, meaning that it's almost a guarantee he'll be going one-on-one against Mike Evans. So there is a possibility, of course, that the heel might rotate around and free up some route runs for Evans, as they do have Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin. However, Ramsey loves to be on the big receiver, so there's very little chance, as I mentioned, in the real-world perspective of the practice, that he's not going to be on Evans. And on top of that, they are starting to focus a lot more on other players in the red zone outside of him. I know he didn't get a touchdown last week, but they also were targeting giving Ronald Jones carries and Gronkowski a lot of targets. So a lot of factors against Evans are dud this week.
I'll ask you a bonus question. Who do you like most in that out of that Bucs wide receiver trio at this point, I guess?
So from a Sporty Eyes analytics report, we can say that even though I just said Mike Evans is going to be a dud this week, Mike Evans is still our number one from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers receiving core, particularly because he still gets the most red zone receptions out of all the receivers, and actually in the top 5 in the entire league in terms of red zone touches and touchdowns for receiver. So that's clearly a good sign. Antonio Brown's getting better and better. However, he doesn't get the red zone touches nor the deep throws that we would want to see. Chris Godwin is slowly starting to take a Scotty Miller role, meaning that he is still valuable at PPR as he gets a lot of receptions, but he needs that to be fantasy relevant because he does not get the touchdowns. So Mike Evans is the best option, but you can't go wrong with either of the 3.
Yeah, that sucks because have to end up starting. We talked about this off camera, but I have to end up starting Chris Godwin in my other league because of the fact that one, he's that team. I'm sorry, it's just there's no hope for that team in my league. Like I know it sucks for me to say that as someone who's giving you guys fantasy advice, but no, just the amount of bad luck that I've had, it's just that's with McCaffrey. So that's all I gotta say. For my for my two fantasy duds, I'm gonna go with someone that we already mentioned in this video and that we completely whiffed on last week, both of us, in Jared Goff, the quarterback for the Rams. Goff, as you mentioned earlier, didn't have the greatest fantasy performances. I believe he only put up 10 or 11 half PPR points, which is insane, right? Like for a quarterback, that's just unacceptable. And his real life numbers look decent, right? 300 plus yards, no touchdowns, no picks, but fantasy numbers, it's not going to cut it. And this week, he's playing against a Bucs defense that has given up the 9th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks this season, and that's even after the shellacking they got by the Saints 2 weeks ago. They still have been very, very solid, so don't start Goff. Don't even consider it, in my opinion. But my other pick is someone who you ended up trading away smartly a couple weeks back for it wasn't a straight up trade, but in a package for Stephon Diggs in our league. And that guy is Todd Gurley, the running back for the Falcons.
Agreed.
Todd Gurley hasn't been too shabby as a fantasy running back this season and has actually given fantasy owners consistent middling running back 2 value in a season that's been absolutely terrible to the position this year. I just mentioned McCaffrey. There's Barkley. There's so many guys. And this week, though, Gurley is facing the Saints defense that has given up the fewest fantasy points to running backs out of any team in the NFL. And from having watched a couple of Saints games in this season and, even beyond the season, man, that rush defense is legit, guys. Oh my, they can stop the run. Like, it's actually insane. So I would just try staying away from Gurley this week as much as possible. I know he's going to get some targets out of the backfield, but I just don't think he's going to be a great play this week against that Saints rush defense.
Definitely have to agree. I'll talk about it in a little bit because we're about to mention our MVPs, and that's going to have to tie in a lot to what is going to happen to Todd Gurley.
Okay. I'm hoping it's someone that is on my fantasy team right now in our league, because you did mention it has something to do with Todd Gurley, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that in 3, 2, 1. Who will be your fantasy MVP for Week 10? And I'll just say my fantasy MVP is someone that I would hope is yours too, but I mean, there's so many great options. So go ahead.
Yeah, you'll be very happy. Based on, I know what your team looks like. You'll be very happy. Sporty Eye, from our calculations, our fantasy MVP this week is going to be Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints.
Yep.
Which ties into Todd Gurley, because Todd Gurley's value is even lower than it already is, because this game is going to turn into a shootout, which means that the Falcons are almost certainly going to abandon the run. And we've seen in all the other scenarios they've fallen in a big margin, they actually take Gurley out to put in Hill so they can come out for routes. Because Todd Gurley is not necessarily a great pass catcher, more of a true workhorse running back. So that doesn't play well for him. Anyways, back to Michael Thomas. The Atlanta Falcons, as you know, are one of the worst defenses in the league. They are healthy. They've trended up, yada, yada, yada. The analytics are there. However, if you see every matchup they have, they always give up a big performance to one of the wide receivers in the other team. In this case, Michael Thomas. He's coming back healthy. They're slowly easing him in. So people are panicking right now because he had a bad game last week. They shouldn't, because he's finally healthy. He's no longer a limited participant in practice, which is a great sign. There is not a single DB or linebacker or anyone on the Falcons that can match up with Michael Thomas. They also have to worry about Kamara, Jared Cook, a great defense. Big reason why Winston is our sleeper pick and why Michael Thomas is our MVP, because you saw what Winston loves to do. He likes to find a big, huge target, throw to him a lot. And Michael Thomas is that target. Against a terrible defense in the Falcons, Michael Thomas is set for an explosion.
Yeah. I hope you are correct, because last week both Austin Hooper and Michael Thomas, I believe, had 2 points a pop in a half PPR league, and that cost me my crucial matchup last week. And yeah, I'm just hoping Michael Thomas is gonna have that breakout finally this season. But I was actually thinking you were gonna mention Julio Jones, because of the fact that Todd Gurley would be like a little bit inefficient this week, but that makes sense with the Michael Thomas pick. And again, hopefully he goes off. I'm gonna mention someone. This is going chalk, man. This is like for me, if you're not looking at like sports analytics or anything, like this is probably the easiest pick. And I'm going with someone else who I also have on my fantasy team in our league. And let's just say that is the quarterback of my team, Kyler Murray, the quarterback for the Cardinals. Again, can go with Dalvin Cook every single week, but I try not to. And that pick this week is Kyler Murray. He is once again my QB1 in our league. And speaking of, don't mean to toot my horn a bit or anything, but the last couple of years I've had a pretty good track record when it comes to drafting fantasy quarterbacks, because I like to draft quarterbacks that I think will ascend and will take their rightful place in the top 5 fantasy quarterback conversation by the end of the season. Last year, I predicted Lamar Jackson's rise in 3 of my leagues, and this year it was Kyler Murray and Josh Allen. So Kyler Murray, though, especially, has been a baller all season long, and even had that insane Hail Murray last week that DeAndre Hopkins made. Your guy, DeAndre Hopkins, is also on your team, and he was just absolutely insane last week, and that absolutely insane catch that is generating Nike and the Jordan brand a lot of money. I don't know if you saw, but it's crazy.
Exactly. Zoom in on the gloves.
Exactly. Yep. And this week he's facing, I get it, they weren't that atrocious last week, but he's facing the Seahawks defense that is still giving up the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. And this isn't even factoring Kyler Murray's work on the ground, right? Like, this is just straight up quarterbacks. And yeah, I don't even think this is like a questionable pick. I think start Murray with confidence. That's really all I gotta say. I do worry because, you know, there's always that chance that one of those inefficient Murray performances could come up. Like, he's had a couple of them like the last 2 years, really, even in this sort of MVP-like season this year. But Kyler Murray's the guy that I predicted would be in the MVP conversation by the end of the season. Watch the tape, watch the immediate reaction videos, watch our fantasy preview videos, and this week I think he's going to show up.
Definitely have to agree there. Kyler Murray, fun fact, has the most fantasy points by a quarterback through 9 games since 1950, when they first started doing fantasy sports. So Murray, at this point, if you bench him, you're out of your mind. You don't need Sporty Eye, you don't need the MVP Sports Zone to tell you that. Yeah. Kyler Murray, especially like you mentioned, his work on the ground, they don't have an answer in Seattle for that. And I can boldly say that every single option on that offense is going to be a startable player this week for fantasy, including Drake and Edmonds.
And Edmonds, wow, okay.
We saw what they did against a tough defense. We saw what they did all season against much better defenses. There are way too many weapons on the field. Somebody's going to explode, and Kyler Murray is going to be the orchestrator of all of it. So that's a good pick.
Let me ask you this as your last question before we wrap up. Do you think the Cardinals could have somewhat of a letdown game after that amazing win last week? Because, you know, that's always bound to happen for some teams in this league. I was just wondering what are your thoughts on this. Not fantasy related, but...
So my thoughts is I don't think there's going to be a decrease, because even though Hopkins and Murray had great games, Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald had pretty average games, and also really quietly, Kenyon Drake had a fantastic game last week.
First game back.
So that's very quiet because people are always looking for the touchdowns. He didn't get the touchdowns, but he got over 100 yards in 16 carries, which is excellent. Against a Seattle defense that's going to have to hone in on somebody, there is a chance that the other players step up. There's too many weapons on this team for there to be a dud week. So all at this point now is who do you want to rate higher? Of course, in the wide receiver core, we have Kirk and Hopkins. In the running back core, very interesting, but in Sporty Eyes rankings, we actually have Kenyon Drake ahead of Chase Edmonds for this week.
Edmonds is still a good play for this week, correct?
He is still a good play. I would say a flex or a low-end RB3. So depending on the depth of your team, he's startable. Otherwise, best left on the bench for this week.
Yeah. And all you need to know about my the team that I told you was hopeless at this point in my other league, I'm probably going to have to start Edmonds. That's how bad it is. But that's all I got to say. That's all I got to say.
Yeah. He can still have a decent game. Don't worry. I don't think he's going to bottom out at 3-4 points.
Yeah.
But I don't expect anything more than 10.
Okay, sure. That's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, it's always great to get you guys to engage with the DNB Sports Zone channel. We're climbing right now, almost to 300 subs. Make sure you sub up. Make sure you like this video. Noah, as always, every single week, it's always great to have you on, bro. And thank you so much for all the fantasy advice that you give to these good people who are watching this video. And yeah, man, it should be another good week. Week 11, man. You know, this is the time of the year when a lot of teams, a lot of fantasy owners are trying to make moves and make it to the playoffs. You know, maybe they're on the fringe.
Fingers crossed moments.
Yeah. So, people definitely need your fantasy advice in particular, because you always got to trust the machine. So, thank you again for being on here. Thank you guys so much for watching once again. But Noah, do you have any other final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I just think that I love this part of the season. Regardless if my team is undefeated or out of the playoffs, it's always good to make the final push. Always good to have fun, and make sure to have fun in the first place. I know you guys can stress out about your lineups, but you know, fantasy sports is for fun. So, sure.
Yeah. That's it for this one, guys. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and peace.